Hello and welcome. Today's recorded lecture is all about Chapter 7 of the text, which is Enhancing Communication Skills in Groups. So, in groups and in teams, you can have many different goals or purposes for meeting, whether that's for social interaction and affection or to accomplish a goal or a task. Either way, communication can help achieve those goals or it can get in the way. So, we're going to be talking about different ways that communication is a part of these group processes, specifically talking about nonverbal and verbal communication. So, we're going to begin with verbal communication and the verbal dynamics in small groups. So, communication is how we get anything done. It's the creation and negotiation of shared meaning. And a main way we create and negotiate meaning is through language, specifically through spoken word. So we can use language to do a lot of different things, to foresee events, reflect on the past, to plan, to consciously control your behavior, others' behavior, and resolve issues. And even if we think back to really some core and foundational theories of language and of linguistics, you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, I have the semiotic triangle. And that is these three different things and how they interact with each other. So, symbol, reference, sometimes we call it thought, and the referent. So, I like to explain the semiotic triangle with a tree. I'm not sure why. I think that's how it was first explained to me. And being from the Northwest, I think about trees a lot. So, the symbol is the word tree and the sound you make, the different languages you use, right? So, the symbol is the word. It could also maybe be like a drawing of a tree. It's representative. And so when you hear the word tree, a thought comes to mind depending on your own experience and relationship with trees. And that is the relationship that connects what I have said, the word tree, to the actual object of a tree. So in the semiotic triangle, the symbol is language. We use language to almost trigger these mental connections that we have to things. And that's how we communicate. So verbal communication is really at the essence of a lot of what we do. But words is how we communicate, but sometimes it gets in the way and words can be barriers. So, we're going to talk about three different ways that words can be barriers when building relationships, when working in groups, anything like that. So, the first is a concept called bypassing, and that's just when a word has different meanings and the people in communication have different meanings for that word. So, an example of this is the word midday. So I was going on a trip with some friends in the before times when we were allowed to do that safely. And my friend booked the flights for us. And so I asked him, our flights are next week. What time do we need to leave in order to get to the airport in time to catch our flight? And he said, we should leave midday. And I thought, okay, great. Like what time? Like midday is a general time frame for me. It could be anywhere from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., something in the middle. And this went on for a couple of days where I kept asking him, but really, what time do we need to leave? And he kept saying midday. And this particular friend is from New Zealand, grew up in the UK, now living in Los Angeles. And to him, and in New Zealand and in the UK, midday is a very specific time that means noon. There's midnight and midday, but I didn't really have that association with the word midday. So it created confusion. And it took a while before we requested clarification. We figured it out. We left at noon. We caught our flight. Right, but that's an example of bypassing miscommunication from differences in meanings of words. Another way that words can be barriers is through allness statements, and these are broad generalizations where you're implying truth without exception, when in actuality, there probably are some exceptions. So it can be convenient, but not always accurate. So an example would be maybe you're preparing for a big group assignment and you say adding another group meeting is not going to help us get a better grade on the assignment. That may be true for you, but there's probably exceptions. And by saying this, you might be shutting down other people in the group who do feel the need to meet again or think it would be beneficial. And then the last way that words can be barriers is interchangeably using facts and inferences by taking an observation and making a conclusion. So, an inference is something that is able to be speculated about and interpreted, but when you present them as facts, that's when you get into some tricky territory. So, the phrase women are better drivers than men, that is an inference. You're able to speculate, you're able to interpret it. And when we use these, it can be confusing and it can be misleading. So, how do we overcome these barriers? For bypassing, to try to avoid that, you can use specific language and clarify and try to be aware of any intercultural differences that exist in the group in which you're communicating. For honest statements, don't overgeneralize. It's easy, it can be funny, but ultimately it may be hurtful, harmful, and or confusing. And then for fact and inference, you want to clarify and analyze and allow room for difference of opinion. And that's going to be helpful in overcoming that. So with talking and with language, we have the other side of the equation, which is listening. And that's a big part of communicating verbally, is trying to understand what other people are saying and recognizing how and why are you listening and what are the things that you're paying attention to. So the book lists 4 different types of listening styles. The first listening style is called relational style. I think of this as people-oriented listeners. So these are people that are really in tune with others' feelings and emotions. They're very empathetic. And they're more likely to focus on stories and small group communication. And stories over facts is going to be more important to them. And they're likely to take on social maintenance roles where the work that they are doing is creating a positive group climate as opposed to more task related roles. The second type of listening style is called task style, and that I like to think of as action oriented listening. So they prefer work that is brief, error-free, organized. They want you to get to the point and to do something with the information. They're often skeptical of what they hear. And everything that they hear, they're really trying to glean, what do I need to do? And they help the group stay focused to achieve the group goal. And a big difference between this style of listener and the other ones that we're going to talk about in a second is that they want brief. They want to the point. They're not really willing to listen to a lot of detail at length because that's going to get in the way of getting things done. So let's talk about the next 2 ones. So the next listening style is called critical style, and this is value listeners. So while they can be a bit more task oriented than relationally oriented, they like rich content and they like complex information. They don't need it to be short and snappy like the task style, but the content must be supported by evidence and details or else it will be rejected. So as they're listening to a lot of information, they're making value judgments. And so they tend to be good note takers and analyzing group issues in the moment and good at making judgment calls. This is good, this is not, this is helpful, this is not. And that's the main difference between the critical style and the analytical style. Analytical styles also like rich content and like complex information, but they're not making those value judgments in the moment. Instead, they're really trying to listen objectively, collect everything, withhold judgment and value until afterwards. And then they're going to make action and value based off of that. So, with listening and just active listening in general, this is going to be helpful for anyone who struggles to listen, which, even if you think you're a great listener, there's times where we fall short, whether it's because we have things going on in our lives that are distracting, we're not feeling well, we're stressed. The person that we're trying to listen to, something about them makes it difficult to listen. Maybe they don't talk slow enough or loud enough, whatever it could be. So, here are just some helpful hints for practicing being an active listener. So, stop, look, and listen. Those are the first three steps. So, stop, you really want to try to be there mentally and not just physically. Try not to rush the speaker and to really allow time for the person to speak for however long they need to. And really try to suspend judgment, value any sort of critical reflection, and just be an open vessel. But you want to look as well. So pay attention to their voice quality, pitch, rate, volume, silence. What does that say about what they're trying to say? And then listen by putting yourself in that person's shoes and think, how is this person feeling? And how is that affecting what they're trying to say? Next, you want to ask appropriate questions, asking clarifying questions, asking prodding questions to try to get more information. Anything like that can be helpful for active listening. And then paraphrasing content is helpful, and that allows the listener to say, yes, that is what I'm trying to communicate, or no, that's not quite, this is what else I want you to understand. And then doing the same thing with feelings, because sometimes content and feelings are very different. And so paraphrasing their feelings can help clarify how they're feeling, or even just be helpful for them to understand how they're feeling. So that was verbal communication. Now let's go on to nonverbal communication in groups, starting with understanding the power of nonverbals. So, communication scholar Robert Mehrabian, who was a researcher at UCLA, and a lot of his work was published in the 1970s, he really studied nonverbal communication and how that directed and influenced emotional meaning of what people were trying to say. So he found and kind of coined this rule, which we call the 7-38-55 rule. And when talking to someone, the emotional meaning that the person listening, where do they get that emotional meaning from? 7% of the emotional meaning comes from verbal, from what they're saying. 38 comes from their voice, their vocal qualities. How fast are they speaking? How loud? What is the pitch like? Are they monotone? And then 55% of emotional meaning is taken from facial expressions. So both vocal qualities and facial expressions are considered nonverbal communication. That means that 93% of emotional meaning comes from nonverbal communication. So let's talk about what are the different types of nonverbal. So that way we can have a greater understanding of emotional communication, but also just a greater understanding of communication in general. I think nonverbals are really overlooked and downplayed, but they're so important and often overlooked and taken for granted in communication. So there's 5 different types of nonverbal components that we'll cover. The first is emblems, and these are movements or gestures that act in lieu of spoken words. So instead of saying yes, you nod your head. And we know that when you nod your head, you're saying yes. And when you shake your head from side to side, you're saying no. You don't have to actually say yes or no for us to know what you mean. The next type of nonverbal component is illustrators. And these are nonverbal behaviors that add meaning to verbal communication. He was this close, and you use your hands to indicate how close he was, or clapping in addition to cheering for someone at the end of a play. The next type of nonverbal component we have is affect display, and that is facial expressions that convey different feelings or emotions. Examples: frowning, smiling, smirking, all of those. The next one we have is regulators. And these are nonverbal behaviors that help the flow of communication or control communication within a group. So, eye contact, raising your hand, putting a hand out if you're leading a discussion as if to say, it's your turn to speak. Any of those would count as regulators. They're regulating your conversation, other people's conversation. And then the last type that we'll cover is called adapters. And these are just nonverbal communication that you do, not necessarily to communicate anything, but just to satisfy whatever personal need your body needs at the moment. So, scratching, yawning, pushing your glasses up, shoving your hair out of your face, all of those are considered adapters, nonverbals. So here I have a slide with some different GIFs, GIFs, who knows, who cares, but each of these is a different type of nonverbal. So we're going to start with Miss Jennifer Lawrence over on the side of the screen. So she is saying okay and giving a thumbs up sarcastically, but what type of nonverbal would that be? It would be an illustrator because the thumbs up is adding to what she's saying. Even though we can't hear her say okay, we can see her mouth it, so we know that she's saying it. In the bottom, we have a moving image. I'm afraid to say GIF or GIF because in the moment I forget which one it is. Doesn't matter. Communication is all about meaning, right? But here we have a picture from Mean Girls. Everyone is raising their hands to say who was personally victimized by Regina George. And of course, that is a regulator. So raising a hand is a way to regulate conversation, to get people to participate, to respond to a question, so on and so forth. In the middle, if you are part of Bachelor Nation, you will recognize this as one of the most infamous criers on The Bachelor, Ashley I. Here she is wiping a tear, which is an adapter. So yawning, scratching, wiping a tear, that would be an adapter nonverbal. Over in the corner, we have a shrug. What is that? That is an emblem. So a shrug is a way of saying, I don't know, without having to say, I don't know. And then last but not least, in the bottom right-hand corner, we have a GIF from Believe Inside Out. I haven't seen it. I know I need to. But sometimes you feel like this. You just want to fall face first on the floor. And that is affect display, displaying emotional distress. I hope she gets it together. So another component of nonverbal communication is space. So with space, we can talk about proxemics and territoriality. And so proxemics is just how close you are from yourself and other people. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but also territoriality. It's not just the distance, but it is the entitlement and how much space are you entitled to? How do you show power through your closeness, through your distance? And we can see a lot of that would play into small group communication. So let's talk a little bit more about proxemics specifically. So Edward T. Hall, he is kind of all over the place in communication studies as far as disciplines that reference him. In intercultural studies, if you've taken that class, you probably have heard of him before. And he did a lot of work with diplomatic people working in international affairs and international communication and really trying to quantify cultural differences. And so one way that he found cultural differences is by how close people stand to one another based on different types of context. So he found that intimate space is usually 0 to 1.5 feet. Personal space is from 1.5 feet to 4 feet. Social space 4 to 12, and public space 12 and beyond. So here is a visual for you. So depending how close you feel comfortable standing to other people is going to indicate how personally close you feel to them, or socially or intimately, right? And so the farther away, the less involved you feel, or the less amount of closeness you feel to those people. And so you can almost see, or even experience someone who you don't know that well. Maybe you want to stand in a more social space, but as you get to know them more and more deeply, you get a little bit more comfortable with them being closer. And in groups that are meeting in person, you can start to see this. And when I teach this class in a classroom, the first class meeting, everyone's desks are further apart. And then by the end of the semester, desks are touching when they meet into small groups. So it's another way of showing social affection, social closeness, and all of that. So these are the concepts that I wanted to cover today. There's plenty more from the text, but this is what I wanted to highlight. Thank you so much for listening, and continue on with the rest of the module.